Hi everyone, welcome to the MSU Broad Art Museum. Glad to have you all here this evening. My name is Stephen Bridges. I'm the interim director here at the museum, as well as the senior curator and director of curatorial affairs. It's always quite a mouthful, but thank you. It's a pleasure to have you here with us this evening. And in turn, I hope that you join me in welcoming our special guest this evening, artists Mia Pearlman, Marquès, and Keith LaMar, who we have joining us via video conference. I want to take just a quick moment to acknowledge that this talk was postponed. The show digest, of which the artists are behind, was originally scheduled to open on February 17th, and for reasons that I think are probably clear to everyone in this room, that was not possible. And so I want to thank everyone for their flexibility and understanding to be able to reschedule this talk and to join us here this evening to have this important conversation. I want to start also by expressing my incredible gratitude to the artists, to Mia, to Albert, and especially Keith. This collaboration between the museum and you all has been absolutely incredible, and I hope that you all here tonight have had a chance to see the exhibition before the talk. If not, there will be some time after the conversation this evening to spend some time with the work, and the show is truly, I think, stunning both in terms of its presence, but also in the ways that it speaks, and we'll talk a little bit more about that during the conversation. I would also like to take a moment to recognize the incredible staff of the MSU Broad Art Museum, without whom this piece would never have come to fruition, nor would it have the educational and social impact it continues to have today. Even this morning, Mia and Albert were very kind to spend with a visiting class, and we continue to tour the exhibition on a regular basis, as well as spreading the message of the work and the important ideas and social justice values behind it. On the staff, I also want to specifically highlight the work of Evan Christopherson. I don't believe Evan is here tonight, but he certainly deserves special recognition, as well as Brian Kirchensteiner, who really brought this work into being. I would also like to thank MSU professors Dan Trago and John Fry, and the student employees who worked with Mia and the museum staff, including Ryan Frund, hopefully I said that right, Laura Matthews, Alex Von Hoff, and Olivia Moret, among others. And finally, I would like to express the gratitude to MSU FCU for their support of the Artist Project series, which continues to bring incredible works of art, critical stories, and new and important ideas into the world. So to start, I'm going to introduce our special guests here, and then we're going to jump into the conversation, which I'll lead initially, but then we're going to carve out a good chunk of time at the end to hopefully have a conversation with the audience. We have a good group here tonight, but also certainly a size that will hopefully lend itself well to a little bit more of a direct conversation between our special guests and you all here in the audience. So to begin, I'm going to introduce Keith LaMar. Keith LaMar has fought for decades to defend his innocence and his life. He was sentenced to death in the aftermath of the 11-day 1993 Lucasville prison uprising in Ohio. He has since served 3 decades on death row in Ohio in solitary confinement. On November 16, 2023, the state intends to execute him. Despite all that has been stacked against him, LaMar continues to defend his innocence. LaMar credits jazz music, literature, poetry, and writing for saving his life. In 2014, he published his story in a soulful, fiery, and captivating book titled Condemned. In it, he traces the injustices he has suffered for nearly a lifetime, pulling back the veil on the carceral state and its racial biases. Most importantly, he compels readers to consider their place within the larger social system, inviting those who stand on the side of social justice to join him, not just on his behalf, but also for the countless, nameless, faceless people caught up in the struggle for humanity. LaMar regularly speaks to high school and university classes around the country and leads multiple book clubs with high school students. Many artists, musicians, activists, scholars, and lawyers have joined the movement to bring light to his case and to fight for a new trial. Albert Marquès is a pianist, composer, and political activist from a working-class industrial town outside of Barcelona. After playing with Marc Maralta and others in the Barcelona scene mixing jazz and flamenco, he moved to Paris, where he played with Remy Vignolo and Pierre Perchaud and became the pianist in African-American drummer Leon Parker's quartet. In New York, he finally combined his biggest influences, contemporary jazz and social justice, by creating Freedom First with Keith LaMar. Marquès has recorded 4 albums as a band leader and regularly collaborates with rhythm master Ari Honig, Spanish flamenco singer and saxophonist Antonio Lizana, Zach and Adam O'Farrell, and other American and European musicians. He lives in Brooklyn, New York with his wife, sculptor Mia Pearlman, who I'll get to in just a moment, and their children, Avida Isol. You want to say hi? Mia Pearlman is known for her site-specific cut paper installations and permanent public sculptures. Her work has been exhibited around the world, including the Museum of Arts and Design, Goyang Aram Gallery in South Korea, Smack Mellon in Brooklyn, New York, the Renwick Gallery of the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and the Manchester Art Gallery. Pearlman's installations and sculptures have been featured in over 25 books on contemporary art and in both international and domestic press, including the New York Times, New York Magazine, New York Post, and the Boston Globe. And I'll add the City Pulse here in East Lansing as well. Pearlman is also a founder and co-leader of True Blue New York, a progressive grassroots organization that in 2018 was instrumental in defeating the IDC, a breakaway conference of 8 New York State senators who blocked progressive legislation in every area by giving Republicans control of the state Senate. TBNY helped drive many groundbreaking legislative wins in 2019 and 2020, including legislation to severely limit the use of solitary confinement in New York State. So please join me in welcoming our guests. I also forgot one very important, very large thank you, which is to Amy Gordiju, who's here with us in the front row, who is in many ways the person behind Justice for Keith LaMar, the organization that supports much of this work and certainly the cause to which we'll be speaking much of today. So thank you, Amy, for being here. So to start it off with, I want to ask you all, how did it all begin? If you wouldn't mind kind of taking us back to the initial stages of how you started working together and what the driving impulse was at that time.
Hello, everybody. This all started in 2020 when, as you remember, March 2020, a global pandemic started, so there were no concerts. We were all at home, and with a group of other musicians where we live in Flatbush, Brooklyn, we were doing concerts every day outdoors for the community. We live in a neighborhood with a population mainly from Haiti and Bangladesh, and we also gave free lessons for the children in the neighborhood. Also, as you, I'm sure, remember, in April 2020, George Floyd got murdered, and at least in Brooklyn, there were daily BLM protests during more or less 5 or 6 months. So I was attending both. At that time, also our neighbor, Brian Jackson, well known for his work with Gil Scott-Heron in the 1970s. So his wife read Keith's book, and he told us about this man that was saying that John Coltrane saved his life. Well, I moved to New York and to the United States because of black music, and mainly jazz. So all of it had to be connected somehow, going to protests, playing on the streets, Keith's story. And in August 2020, the first Freedom First happened at Grand Army Plaza. And I feel proud to say that all of this really started as a street protest. It's a grassroots movement that started on the streets of New York. And through music, what happened is that there is a friendship that was born that led to all of this. That would be my short answer. Yes, I could keep going, but I tried to explain it as short as possible. Mm-hmm. What would you answer?
Well, I would add that, excuse me, in February 2022, Albert and Keith released the first album in history by an artist on death row, which was sort of the culmination of all of the concerts that they had been doing outdoors on the street and in other places with a really amazing group of jazz musicians from all over the world. So Now they've played in South America and Europe, and now they're doing a tour in the Midwest. They'll be in Ohio and Chicago, in addition to Michigan. So I think that this collaboration really came out of this friendship that we developed with Keith over these years. And we think a lot about what can we do as individuals about the things that we care about in life, right? And sometimes we all feel powerless about, what can I do in the face of the Supreme Court or, whatever, climate change. And I think that both of us looked at it as activists as well as artists and said, well, what can I do? He's in Ohio, we're in New York. Well, I'm a musician. I can use music to raise awareness about Keith. And I thought, well, I'm a sculptor. That's what I can do. So that's really like how it grew very organically out of the relationship that we developed with Keith. But of course, Keith should answer this question.
Yeah. Should we have Keith answer? Yeah.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, Keith.
Hi, Keith.
Abby, I didn't know if you wanted me to make some remarks or whether or not I'm responding to a question.
Yes, the question was, how did we all meet? How did all of this start?
Well, we're talking specifically about the sculpture and the CD too. It started, with a conversation. I was on the phone talking to Mia about mass incarceration, which is kind of an ominous catchphrase that is bandied about these days, without any real connection to what it means for the people who have been swallowed up by this monstrosity. But she really wanted to understand it, not just academically, but experientially. How did it impact me as a human being? And once I kind of understood the sincerity in her request, I just brought her into it. But she's an artist, she's a sculpturist, so as we were talking, she was already formulating in her mind, I could hear it as she was, asking me questions, as she was formulating the sculpture. And then she brought me into that process, which was, kind of wondrous to be swept away on the wings of somebody else's, thought. But, saying that, I don't pretend to have any insight into the convoluted contours of her mental process. I mean, she's like a mad scientist, really, when it comes to this. And so I gave it over to her, and we kept talking, we kept walking through the whole thing, and and you see the result. And she and her family were here yesterday, over the weekend rather, and one of the things I was curious about, like, what would be her impression when she got up and walked away? There was a reporter who did a review of the sculpture not too long ago named Chelsea, and she remarked that it was kind of difficult to walk away once you come into contact with something of this immensity, enormity. And that is the hope, that people who come into contact with this thing, this monstrosity, that it unnerves you and convicts you in a way that makes you say to yourself that what more can we be doing as human beings? What more can we be doing as a society to stop the cycle of harm and hurt that we are perpetuating against one another? So that, I think, is the basic structure. And just briefly, I was talking to my 9-year-old friend, Aviva, the other day, and real bright young lady, 9 years old, and she had built this structure made out of blocks, somewhat similar to her mother, like a sculpture. And her brother, as little brothers do, tumbled it over. And she didn't say anything. She, looked and, patiently waited for him to build his structure. And then she very patiently knocked that over. Then she looked at me and she said, cause and effect. And a 9-year-old child to have that understanding that something precedes what we do and who we become. For a 9-year-old to have that understanding, I think is really, really critical. I think in some ways that we as an adult have retreated to our adolescence, when it comes to tackling these difficult problems. But it all, as Aviva would say, starts or begins with cause and effect. And I just think that was an important point that she made. And thanks, Aviva. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you all for that. My next question has to do a little bit about collaboration, because collaboration at its core often involves a lot of give and take between collaborators, right? And in the end, in theory, you create something more, something larger, in whatever terms that may be meaningful, than what can be done on one's own. So can you share a little bit about what your collaboration looks like, how it works, obviously the additional kind of efforts or means or strategies that need to be employed to collaborate with Keith in his situation?
I just want also to say for 1 second that what we're experiencing right now is not normal. We're just hearing somebody talking live from death row in Ohio, right? But that's possible. That's legal. We are hearing from him directly. Why don't we do it more? Why don't we hear more directly from people who are experiencing all of this? About the collaboration, I think that is an incredibly important element of all this work with the sculpture, with Freedom First. By collaborating with him as an equal, we are humanizing him, and I would also say we are also humanizing all incarcerated people, because then suddenly it's not that they're not only animals or monsters or criminals. They are in fact sensitive, creative human beings. Like in any true collaboration, there must be a lot of trust, and sometimes there are even disagreements. And I think that's why we don't really collaborate in general, besides maybe our marriage. And it doesn't always go well, so I don't know. It's going very well so far. But, it's not easy to collaborate. That's why we don't do it, because it's difficult. It's even more difficult, obviously, where you have somebody who is inside of a prison who does not have access to our world. But we did it. We are doing it. It is possible. So why don't we do it more?
One thing that was really important to me about this collaboration is, again, all three of us are artists. So before we knew Keith, he wrote a book, right? He's a poet, he is an activist. So it was really a collaboration of equals that, as Albert said, requires a lot of trust. You really have to believe that the other collaborators are going to show up and do something amazing. And what's really important to me about this collaboration is that we're all able to absolutely be our individual selves as artists without compromise, right? So I wasn't telling Keith what he needed to write, and Albert wasn't telling me what materials to put in the sculpture, and I wasn't telling him what the sound should be. Like, we each came to it, did our thing together, and somehow that, I hope, coalesced into something that is really cohesive, that really comes together as one thing, as one sculpture, one artwork.
You want Keith, right?
Sure.
The question is about. The question is about how does the collaboration work?
All right. So this question that we want to ask is how the collaboration works.
I mean, the collaboration works. Yeah. The collaboration works exactly what you see and hear now. At some point, I was able to get on a video visit as I'm doing now. I think a few of the songs were created like that. But the first song where I went into the studio for the first time was done through this medium right here. But most of the album was done over the phone. This angle had to be in order to secure the connection. I was lying down nearly the whole album, basically. But the collaboration, as he just alluded to, requires a lot of trust, because there's a lot of disconnect. A lot can get lost in translation, not just because there's a language barrier, but because this place is not set up to support human connection, to facilitate exchanges between one human being to another. And so a lot of times that requires patience and trust and faith and all those words that we hear a lot about but are so difficult to practice. But this album wouldn't have been brought into reality, nor the sculpture, if those elements weren't truly there as the foundation of this whole exchange. So it's just basically faith, belief. You know, because I've never done anything sizable like this. An album. I don't consider myself a musician or anything like that. I don't necessarily look at myself as an artist at all, actually. But somehow Albert and these wonderful musicians who came along convinced me that I do have a contribution to make, and I've been trying to make that contribution. Yeah, to the best of my ability, I've been trying. Yeah.
You can see that the collaboration also involves a lot of technical hurdles that have to be surmounted at every point. For example, in the sculpture, those videos of Keith, he had to record himself using this app, JPay, which is very expensive. And he recorded 30-second videos of himself, which he sent one at a time, memorizing his own poetry, understanding where the breaks would be every 30 seconds, figuring out that it would cut him off. And then he sent those to Amy, who edited them into videos that make sense and have the right timing, and then recorded the audio over the phone so that it wouldn't have weird breaks, right? So imagine the amount of time and thought that had to go into just that. And a lot of times, we set up a video conference like this and it just doesn't happen. Like the app doesn't work or the prison cuts it off halfway through. So there could be an entire book written on how complicated all of this is to do. Obviously it's worth doing, but it's something that, typical collaborations don't have to consider.
Yeah, maybe, or Albert, can you explain a little bit? I mean, so every 30 minutes, Keith has to hang up the call and call back, is that correct?
And every 30-minute call is $9.90. So it's expensive to do any of this kind of advocacy for themselves.
Yeah. Sorry, did you?
No, I just wanted to just add something. This is a business, JPay. The only people I know on earth that still pay for music are American inmates. $1 per song. It's a monopoly, and they make a lot of money with each email, each phone call, each video call, each song.
So I wanted to pick up kind of what you were just leading us towards, Mia, and actually ask Keith a little bit more directly about his process as an artist. With limited access to materials and often information. Keith, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your sources of inspiration and how you continue to seek out creative outlets for your work. And maybe we can use the process a little bit of the sculpture too, just to hear a little bit more from how you organize that in your mind, how you approached making the videos. As I've learned from Mia and also Albert, the process of, there's a kind of sequence of the videos too that was very intentional. So hearing a little bit about that process would be wonderful.
That's a question for Keith, right?
Correct.
Can you repeat it? Can you ask him? Oh, he didn't hear it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that a speaker?
No, we can put the speaker in. Yes.
It's okay now?
Yes. Hey, Keith. Steven has a question for you.
So Keith, I wanted to ask you a little bit more directly about your process as an artist, and acknowledging, limited access to materials and often information, what your sources of inspiration are, and how you continue to seek out creative outlets for your work, and building off of what Mia was just discussing, hearing a little bit about your process of making the videos and how you were kind of thinking through making those videos, but also with the kind of intentional sequence that you created.
Yeah, well,
Just 1 second, Keith. Just 1 second. We plug the phone to the speaker. Go for it.
Well, I think one of the most important things to understand is that this is not just a project. This is my life. And so the things that I talk about, that I speak about, are the experiences that I've undergone, the pain, real pain that I actually suffered. You know, I've read over 1,000 books in over 3 decades. I've been in solitary confinement. That's an indication of how much information has been digested. You know, I was thrown into this small little space, and it was in that small little space that I had to expand myself within my own mind. And all of these things, these books that I've read, these experiences, the conclusions that I've arrived at were downloaded into my system. And so for me, my process is basically going back inside myself to retrieve these things. It's not anything more complicated than that. But it's a complex process because I have to relive the pain. You know, I have to go in search of these different experiences and stay there for as long as I can to kind of extrapolate or kind of pull from those experiences the essence or the kernel that, you know, that's involved. And that requires a lot of suffering. You know, my behalf, it's like taking a towel and wringing it, you know, dry. And sometimes, you know, only a drop will come. You know, and I had to wait and suffer some more, and then another drop, another, you know, paragraph or another, you know, stanza, or however you want to look at it. But yeah, it was a very, very painful process. But again, you know, being in collaboration with these, you know, these consummate musicians and having access to that dimension also gave me the confidence that it was worth the price of admission, that the pain that I would have to pay to meet them in that place, that it was worth it. Because ultimately I'm telling my story, and my story is reaching a wider audience because of that. And, you know, I always, like, you know, go back to what James Baldwin once said, in speaking about our own pain. You know, he said this, you know, pain, your pain is really trivial as it relates to you as an individual. It's only when you are able to access that pain and help other people that it then becomes, you know, something worth pursuing. You know, to the extent that you can connect to other people's pain. And insofar as you can do that, you can be, you know, released from your own pain, you know, because we are connected so inextricably as human beings that we go through each other in order to reclaim our humanity. That's something that I had to learn the hard way, but I learned it. And this album, this sculpture, is a reflection of, you know, me trying to retrieve my humanity. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Keith. So I wanted to ask too about speaking more directly to the sculpture. For me, one of the most important and meaningful characteristics of the piece is the way that it speaks in different ways. And of course, that includes Keith's voice, poetry, spoken word, the music, Albert, that you composed for the piece, and then the material and the form of the work itself. And so I would love to hear maybe a little bit from each of you, or maybe Albert and Mia, you can kind of fill in, you know, your parts, your role in this. You know, how did you arrive at this design, and how do you harness these different ways of speaking to communicate to your audiences?
Good question.
I get all the sculpture questions. Well, as Keith said, you know, this project really came out of conversations that we had by phone, where I was asking him a lot of questions about the materiality of his like day-to-day life. Like, what does it smell like? What does it taste like? He talked about how he has all these back pains because he's been sleeping on a slab of concrete with a thin mattress for 30 years. You know, how the food is like dog food, basically inedible. How the guards at the prison bring in their own water because they don't want to drink the water that comes out of the tap. You know, like we think of this system and it's impossible to really wrap our minds around it. Even if you know someone in prison, I mean, it's so gargantuan and terrifying. And I really wanted to know what it's like on the inside. And so this is when he started to tell me about how he thinks of it as a digestive system. that the prison industrial complex, the whole purpose of it is to break you down, to strip you of everything that makes you a human being, right? To literally digest you so that by the end of the process, whether that process is being released or that process is being executed, you can't fight back. You're just completely debilitated by the cruelty and the degradation that you've suffered. And for those people who are released, you know, the goal is to get them back in there because that's how they make money. So if you are completely traumatized by the time you leave and stripped of your humanity, you're extremely likely to wind up back where you started, right? And that's part of the design, and how diabolical that is. Like, who could even imagine something that evil? So what happened was, we had these conversations, I took a lot of notes, and I sat down on my couch. I took my kids to school, Albert was teaching, and I sat down on my couch for about a week, just staring into space. I don't sketch. Sometimes I make scale models when I'm doing a big project. And I literally just sat and stared into space and constructed this in my brain, because it's much faster for me to imagine things than it is to try to sketch them. And I knew so much about their collaboration with Freedom First. Like, I know who they are as artists. You know, I know that Keith is an amazing writer. I knew that he could bring it. You know, if you look at these videos, you can see that not only are they so penetrating and incredible as art, but that Keith is a performer. Like, it's not just reading the poems, he is performing. He is art directing it to the degree that he can. He's wearing different eyeglasses in each one. You know, he's changed his posture, he's changed his hat. You know, he's really an artist bringing his full attention to nuance and detail to everything that he does. And I knew that Albert has been so affected by his visits to the Ohio State Penitentiary and the sonic landscape there. He talks so much to me about the clanging of the gates and the guards and the keychains and everything. There's nothing soft there. Everything is like a hard surface with things bouncing around because of the acoustics. So I kind of sort of understood what we could do. And then I pitched it to them. And I was like, okay, here's this really crazy idea that's super ambitious, and it's going to work with motion sensors. And the reason I wanted to do that is I didn't want to create something where people could just see it and be like, okay, cool, I checked it off the list, I did my part, you know, and now I can go home. I wanted people to feel really involved in it, physically involved. So when you trigger Keith or you trigger the sound, you're implicated in it. You know, you're not just a passive observer, you're actively having a face-to-face conversation with this man behind, you know, this wall. And for example, like you can see in the first video, Inside the Hole, which is the beginning of Keith's story when he's 23 and he's just, you know, alone with no family support, dropped out of high school in 10th grade, you know, deluged with tens of thousands of legal documents. And that video is closer to the floor, so you yourself kind of have to get down in a fetal position to be face-to-face with that video, right? So you get to feel in your body a little bit of what he must have felt so small in that situation, so vulnerable. And as you walk around, the videos are at different heights. I mean, I won't reveal all the secrets because maybe you haven't seen it yet, but you may take a look at like how the videos are placed differently and the materials around them are different based on what he's talking about in the videos. So I couldn't make the sculpture until I saw the videos because it's the reaction to that. You know, it's not like some formulaic thing where you just like email your part in. It's really a dialogue between the three of us.
But you started all of this, and I want to thank you for that because I really didn't know. I couldn't understand what you were trying to do, but that's okay. That's okay. And I think it's amazing. What I think that you can do with art or with the sculptures that I cannot do as a musician is play with the idea of a space. And if you have ever been imprisoned yourselves, or if you have ever had to visit family members in a prison, space, room, is something very important there. I cannot talk about that with music. You can with the sculptures. The sculpture is bigger than Keith's cell. Just think about that. The sculpture is bigger than his own cell, where he spends 22, 23 hours a day. And when he can come out of that, he's not with the general population. He's still in an indoor, how would you describe it, Amy? An indoor,
It's like a pod. It's right behind him, actually.
it's a pod where he's alone there.
Right in the middle.
And if you look on this, right in the sky, at one point he can see the sky, right?
And now he can't see this.
No? Even
So
looking,
there's a grate with little holes in it, so he could maybe look through a little hole and find a star that way.
so which is insane. Why do we do that to human beings? I think. Well, it's not just me. The United Nations says that more than 27 days in solitary confinement creates permanent brain damage. That's why the UN considers solitary confinement a form of torture. So it's not a personal opinion. There's a scientific element in it. Why do we do that? You can play with the room, with the space, and I think that's really my favorite part about the piece, that it makes you think about that by going to that hall. That's how, is that how they call it in the US too? Solitary confinement, the prisoners, hall, put you in the hall?
No.
That's how you call it in Spanish.
I mean, let Keith answer that. In the hole there is different than in general population. In
What I-
general population, getting in the hole is what he lives with every day.
Yeah.
Getting in the hole where he
Yeah,
lives,
yeah.
taking any book.
So the sculpture has a whole, I just think that it makes you think about a space in a way that we cannot do that with music. And I think that that's really powerful and really cool. I don't know what I was saying, but I said a lot of other things. What was the question? What were we talking about?
Maybe you can answer, Albert. Like, how did you write the compositions for the
Yes.
sculpture?
Yes. So I didn't fully understand what Mia was trying to do. So she came with me in the recording studio and she really helped me to do that. I've been now in a few jails and prisons in Spain and the United States, in New York City too. And the sounds are something that maybe because I'm more sensitive to that, but I would describe them as industrial. I also worked in factories and it really reminded me of that. It's the complete lack of nature. So you hear a lot of keys, a lot of chains, a lot of gates, and it's really loud and it's all metal and concrete. So everything that you hear when you go around the sculpture is made with a piano. Maybe it sounds like something else. It was all made with a piano. Except that maybe sometimes I didn't actually play a key. I was hitting with a hammer a string. Or I was, as you probably know, inside of a piano you have a harp made of metal. So that's how all those sounds are being made. But they all come from grand piano. Mm-hmm. And that was the idea.
And
That
it was
the idea.
improvised.
It was improvised, yes. That I am a jazz musician, and that's a big part of what I do. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Maybe Keith can talk about it as well. I mean, jazz, as maybe, the improvisation, there's a genre known as free jazz, right? I mean, is there also a metaphor there within that form of music that is somehow meaningful here?
Keith has told me several times that he can explain it better than me, but I'll try to say my interpretation of what he says about jazz. Compare, for example, to European classical music. The jazz and other styles of black music, but I would say that jazz is the one where improvisation is more central, more important. He basically expresses that it makes a lot of sense that enslaved people or oppressed people that did not have a tomorrow, or the idea of being alive in the future was not necessarily part of the equation, would make music that had to be about the now. Some people call jazz the music of the now, and I really like that. On the other hand, European classical music made by the church, meaning the Vatican or the aristocracy, or later the bourgeoisie in France, definitely had a future. So you have the time to write down something and you will think that will exist in 200 years. So I do believe that the improvisational element of jazz has to do with the black experience in the United States and everything related to it. And he explains that much better than me, but I really agree with that argument. It makes a lot of sense that improvisation is still a part of, for example, hip hop, what they call freestyling. It's always there. I don't think that that's a coincidence.
Keith should answer.
You should repeat the question for him. Yeah, maybe you can ask the question.
No, I forget my question. Okay, Keith, the question that I just posed had to do with the form of jazz, and of course, you know, there is a genre of jazz known as free jazz, and certainly I know that you've spoken, and I think even in our initial conversation that I joined, you know, spoke about the liberating nature of jazz, and so I wondered if there was also a kind of metaphorical dimension of jazz as it, you know, has to do with this work.
Just 1 second, Keith. Just 1 second, 1 second. I'm plugging the phone to the speaker. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, when I was first sentenced to death in 1995, I met and became friends with a guy named Snoop, who I referenced in the music because he was such a pivotal person in my life. But he introduced me to jazz and told me that this is not really music per se, but the chronicling of a journey, a harrowing journey from Africa to America. And that this music was stored in the DNA of the captives that were held in the holds of slave ships. That the sound of the cymbals were actually the crashing of waves. And the snare was the heartbeat of the captives. And that the bass line was the rising and setting of the sun. And so he kind of taught me how to listen to it from that vantage point. You know, that, and also gave me to believe that by following these complex patterns, that something was also being healed in the complex structure of my own brain, my own spirit, my own heart, you know, that had undergone various breaks along the way. You know, and music, you know, can heal you in that way. And so music for me has always been a source of medicine, spiritual, emotional, mental medicine, a way for me to repair some of the psychic damage that's done. Because we're not just physical beings. We have a soul. You know, there's deeper parts of us, but it's all very delicate stuff. Like your brain is enclosed in the skull, but the skull could be fractured. The brain could be penetrated, damaged irreparably by experience. And he kind of taught me how this music is by listening to these notes, by following, you know, the path that these patterns were taking me to. That in doing that, that I was also healing something inside myself at the same time, and I believe that. And so this music has meant a great deal to me over the years, has in fact allowed me to hold on to my sanity, my humanity, and has allowed me now to have the opportunity to regain my freedom, my physical freedom, because, you know, the fact of the matter is that you can't be free whether you in or out unless you spiritually, mentally, emotionally liberated. And that's something too that I had to, you know, kind of, you know, wrap my mind around. But I had mentors, I had guides through these very complicated places, you know. Yeah, but yeah, this music is everything to me, everything. Yeah.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to the three of you again. And at this point, we did start a little bit late, but I would like to turn it over if there are questions from you all here in the audience. For Mia, Albert, or Keith, we'd be happy to hear from you now.
Yeah? Should we give them the mic?
I come.
I guess this could go back. This could be a question for the three of you, but how is it kind of combining like your three different backgrounds, like a black man from Ohio, a white woman from New York, you're from Spain. So like the combination of those backgrounds and like in cultures and stuff like that, and creating and learning about these experiences and collaborating.
Did you hear the question, Jason? Great question.
Yeah.
So how you can ask him, yeah. Maybe next time we just ask closer to the phone.
It's like it's a family feud or
So
something.
you don't all have to repeat it.
Hi, so my question was, how is the process of, in like collaboration, when you're like thinking of your three different backgrounds, so you as a black man from Ohio, Mia is like a white woman from New York, and then Albert being from Spain, like working together and, educating each other and all that.
And the question is, how did we bridge the gap?
Yeah.
Are they moving into another space? See, can you hold the line? Put me a B. The most important thing I think we were able to establish is our humanity. That was the common ground on which we, were able to walk and talk. And once that was established, solidity, once that was established, we were able to then just build, from there. That was the most important part. And it didn't really matter that, we had these themes that represented differences. Once we were able to kind of overcome those themes, everything opened up in terms of possibility. And I think those things are put in place so that we aren't able to work together, that we aren't able to reach across whatever that divides us and do the things that need to be done. I mean, to heal the society, to heal this, to change the system, and I say this in Calling Our Souls, we at some point have to change ourselves, not just individually, but as a society. We have to change the way we treat and interact with each other. And that begins with how we see each other. If we aren't able to see each other's humanity, then there's no hope for us. And we have to, begin to understand how, looking at each other from this very, or through this very limited lens is limiting us as a species. And it's causing, untold damage, not only to ourselves as individuals, but to this very planet that we need in order to continue to live, in order to exist. So this record exists because we were able to overcome these things. And I think that's a small indication of what we might be able to accomplish if we as a society do the same thing. As it is above, so it is below. So that's the thing, that macro and micro are connected. But it starts with us as individuals. We have to be willing, even if, it's not very difficult to love somebody that you love. To show kindness to somebody that you love. But the really courageous thing is that you are able to show love to somebody who you don't even know. And one of the songs that we'll be singing tonight on Living, it says that you can die for people whose faces you've never seen. Even though you know living is the most real, the most beautiful thing. But that's just suggesting that in order to be alive, in order to be free, we have to be willing to take risks. We have to be willing to place our life in each other's hands. That's the only way this album came about. This guy who I'd never met, who's from Catalonia, said that, hey man, I think we could do an album. I think it'd be helpful. I wasn't convinced, I'm gonna be honest with you. But what do I got to lose? What do I got to lose? And it's the same thing for all of us. What do we have to lose by believing in each other? So, that's the long answer to your question. Sorry about that.
That's the first.
Do you understand what just happened? Yeah, can you explain it, Amy? What you just witnessed here?
Well, they just moved him, and he happened to be calling on his tablet with a phone, so we could continue to hear him, but he put his hands through the cuff cord, they put the handcuffs on his hands, and he just kept doing what Keith does. But I'm thinking right now, I don't think he's logged off of the kiosk, but that's what I'm thinking about.
In his waistband.
Okay, I'm wondering if he needs to log off the kiosk. But anyway, I'm not sure why they moved him. Did he say why?
Could you say why?
Putting someone else there.
They're bringing
They're bringing in Hassan. So we can see Hassan on Keith, but it's logging off now. Oh, no, that's not Hassan. No, it's not. It's somebody else.
Somebody else has been here.
So I'm wondering if it's logged on. But anyway, that's what happened. And had he only been sitting there, he would have just walked away and we would have lost all the sound. But because he was also calling simultaneous, it stayed on.
And he
Which is
kept
kind of
answering your question
amazing.
while two people brought him to his cell.
Like,
That's Keith LaMar.
right, exactly. Wouldn't
That's
you wanna
Keith LaMar.
collaborate
It
with him?
it's incredible. I always tell him, I would give how did you find that strength? It's truly remarkable. It's truly remarkable.
Do you have time for one more?
We have 10 minutes,
Yeah. A couple more questions, depending on the length of the question and answer. Yeah.
If it's a question for Keith, maybe you should. No, in general.
Yeah.
That guy, I'm concerned about that. Like that guy's gonna log on to his account.
Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Tyler.
Hey, Tyler.
I live in England, so I've come to be part of this Freedom First thing. It's a great honor to see Keith, meet you guys. But I've been saying for a while now, even in England, seeing this is a perfect illustration of the world being upside down. That we have people of such humanity and such dignity and such brilliance and such love locked up in a place like this where people try to deny their humanity. And on the outside, we see criminals, gangsters running our countries, you know, at every level, from the former president, whoever was president before and since. In the United Kingdom where I live, we have a man called Julian Assange in similar situation, and the man who is responsible for starting the war in Iraq, who refused to listen to millions of people marching. He's walking around studios in the BBC, talking all the time. But when you see somebody like Keith display what he's just displayed, at not so long after saying that people like this 9-year-old girl are our future, it can do nothing but give us hope and be grateful that we have people like that to share art with. That's our future. So that was just a comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Got a little more time. One more question
Or comment?
or comment.
I just want to say thank you to you guys.
Yeah, if not, thank you all for joining us again this evening. And I want to mention that there is a concert following the talk tonight. So it's 7:30 at Murray Hall, which is over at the College of Music. Albert and Freedom First and Keith will be performing live, 7:30 to about 9. And we do have maps printed out as well at the front desk of the museum that show the path to get to Murray Hall. Yes. Yeah. Oh, okay. And one more thing for Amy.
I'm
Yeah.
going to do a shameless plug. I've stopped being concerned about it because Keith has about 7 months left for us to get him out of prison or, to save him. So I run Justice for Keith LaMar, and we are doing everything we can to try to fight for him. A recent estimate had it at about 15,000 to 40,000 lawyer hours is what's needed, and it's $250 an hour. So if anybody is of the inclination to be generous, please do that. And when you come, if you come to the show tonight, there are merchandise and things that you can buy. But KeithLaMar.org has a way to donate. So I just put it out there because I've stopped being shy because we don't have time to be shy. So thank you all for that. Sorry.
No. Thank you. Thank you all. And thank you guys very much. I hope you join us at the concert, but we do have a little bit more time, but the galleries are open till 7, so feel free to revisit the artwork in the gallery, and hope to see you over at Murray Hall at 7:30 for the concert. Thanks, everyone.